Assalamu alaikum. You're listening to the New Beginnings podcast. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversations about your journey as a new Muslim.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam, from the Shahada and beyond. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the New Beginnings podcast. I'm your co-host, Bilal Brown.
And I'm Amanda. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we're tackling a very timely yet very sensitive topic, LGBT and converting to Islam. This is a controversial topic for many reasons, and there's a lot of confusion circulating, especially on social media. So we hope that this episode will serve to clarify some misconceptions.
Firstly, to lay the foundation of our discussion today, we have to emphasize that as observant Muslims, we know and we accept that Islam doesn't permit any type of sexual relationship that hasn't been sanctioned by the Quran. And this is generally marriage between a man and a woman. And this is something that is agreed upon by all Islamic schools of thought based on what has been revealed in the Quran and the Sunnah, of the Hadith of the Messenger of Allah.
However, we also recognize that there are some people who come to Islam who may have previously aligned themselves with LGBTQI plus identities. And we hope our discussion with today's guests will serve to support such individuals and to help them to find ways to navigate the particular tests they may face as new Muslims.
Today, we're joined by our two honoured guests. We've got Joanne from Manchester and Giles from Northumberland. So let's start with Joe. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners, please?
Hi, I'm Joanne. I'm in my late 30s. I'm a bisexual woman. I've got 2 children. I'm a software developer and I've been a Muslim for just around a year.
Welcome.
Hey, Giles, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, alaikum. I'm Giles. I'm 58. I'm a mixed heritage man, retired psychotherapist from within the NHS, living in rural Northumberland. I've been Muslim for less than a year. I've been same-sex attracted since childhood, defined myself as gay for the best part of 40 years, but more recently have begun to identify myself as a Muslim who is same-sex attracted.
Okay, interesting. And maybe we can talk about these definitions and, identity markers later on. But I want to say thank you both for sharing yourselves with us. Now, obviously, today's topic is deeply personal, and we're grateful to both of you for agreeing to open up to us about this. To start the discussion off, our first question is, what was your first proper encounter with Islam? And before that, what did you know about it, or what did you think of it? Giles, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I guess in terms of my own background, I've always had a superficial understanding of Islam, as my father was a heritage Muslim of East African Gujarati background. However, he died in my infancy, so didn't know very much about really him or his faith. More recently, in trying to sort of understand who I am in my identity, I felt there was a need to find out more about my father, and that included knowing more about his. And it was from that brought me to kind of exploring kind of Islam in regards to joining New Beginnings and their level 1 kind of course.
So, mashallah, that's really interesting. So your father was Muslim. I'm assuming then your mother wasn't or isn't.
Yes,
Okay.
That's right. My mother is white British, and so I kind of grew up kind of Christian.
Okay, that's really interesting. Joe, would you like to address this question then?
Yeah, sure. I was raised Catholic in Ireland, like most people were through the 80s and 90s. I had a full Catholic education, but I always had an interest in what people believed. Not necessarily being particularly religious myself, but having an interest in belief, philosophy, understanding, and kind of just getting to know what people did and how they lived their lives. I gave up on Catholicism at quite an early age, probably around 12, shortly after confirmation, and identified as an atheist, actually, most of my young adult and adult life. But then in my 30s, while I was undergoing therapy, basically, I decided to start to try and engage with my own spirituality a bit more. That coincidentally, that led me to Islam.
So you've both shared that before Islam, you identified as LGBT. I want to ask if this actually affected your understanding of Islam and Muslims in any way. Did you have any previous prejudices or maybe misconceptions about Islam and Muslims?
I generally knew that the attitude towards relationships was that it was within marriage between a man and a woman. And I realized that, like, I'm possibly slightly privileged in that I am bisexual, so there is still the possibility of a relationship with a man. But I also believe that there's a philosophy of respect there. Like, we got into Surah Al-Hujurat and the verse which says that we were made to know each other. So to me, that means that that there's respect, that there's always that we try, that even if we don't agree with somebody, we try and understand them.
Giles, how about yourself? Did was your sexual orientation at all a barrier for you becoming Muslim or understanding Islam, or did it concern you at all?
Yeah, so kind of going back a bit. So I converted to Christianity in my adolescence. I was at boarding school at the time. And I realized I was same-sex attracted around about that same time. So when I was about 16, 17, I came out to my family, who were very accepting of that. But sadly, I did not find that the case within the Christian community. So I hadn't had any sexual relationships. And so I struggled with that in terms of my Christian faith and the fact that I was same-sex attracted. And I entered the LGBT space really as a consequence of that, to feel that I wasn't alone. I felt a deep sense of needing to feel understood. And I didn't know where my community was anymore. I had identified with the Christian community that was a sense saying to me that I couldn't be Christian and same-sex attracted. And so that's what kind of propelled me, as it were, into the LGBT kind of community. And whilst there, I met a lot of other refugees from other religious traditions who commonly spoke of a sense of their places of worship being places of hostility, judgment, and really a sense that they in themselves were kind of sinful. And so I had a belief that Islam was such a place. At the time, we're talking about the 70s and 80s, there were reports of stoning, of honor-based killings for people who were same-sex attracted. And so I really just kind of thought, religion generally, and particularly Islam, was not a place of emotional, spiritual, or psychological safety. I think the geographical and political context of Islamic lands, meant that I felt very unsafe in traveling to Muslim countries. And so as a same-sex attracted man, I just became very, very wary, very, very suspicious of Islam and Islamic kind of community generally.
So based on these impressions that you had, which, sadly are not unfounded, how did you then come to see Islam as something that you wanted to embrace? What was it that made you realize that you could be Muslim?
I started to realize that, like, I was a bit more of an angry atheist when I was younger, but as I kind of got older and matured a bit and kind of started to read more and kind of just develop more of an understanding of things, I realized that maybe faith was something that I could pursue. And this is really coincidental, but I think it was the first day of Ramadan last year, somebody put a link to New Beginnings in my local Nextdoor group. And I spent, I think, about my first 2 or 3 hours in work on the site and just reading convert stories and that sort of thing. And then just decided, like, I'm going to give this a chance. I'm going to see what happens here. And it was the whole take one step towards Allah and he comes running towards you made sense. And I took my Shahada the 28th of June last year. So probably about 3 months after it started kind of reading into things.
Giles, how about yourself? Considering you had that experience with the other people who had such negative experiences of religion? What helped you to overcome that?
Yeah, so being kind of an angry adolescent, at the age of 18, it was put to me that I couldn't be a Christian and same-sex attracted or gay. And so I just thought, well, this just isn't for me then. There is an LGBT community where I can feel accepted and feel part of. So I just walked away from any kind of religious belief and had a very secular life and enjoyed being in partnership relationships, being part of the community. I was living in London. I was accepted by my family, was doing well within my kind of career, and was in a long-standing, long-term relationship. But then 10 years ago, something went wrong in that relationship and I was heartbroken. And I was kind of coming up to sort of 50, I guess, at that kind of point. Well, maybe a bit earlier than that, maybe 47, something like that. And I kind of came back into my Christian kind of faith. I felt that there was something missing within my life, a deep desire for intimacy, a deep desire to be understood. And I kind of felt that maybe that just wasn't going to happen for me within kind of the pursuance of human relationships. And that got me thinking a lot more about kind of God. So I recommitted myself within the kind of Christian faith for 10 years. And then I was very happy, as a Christian, kind of going to church. But in my exploration of wanting to know about my heritage, about the fact that I am brown, that my father was a Muslim, I just thought, well, I need to know a little bit about this kind of faith in a very neutral way. And that brought me to new beginnings. And I had no intention of converting to Islam. It really was just wanting to know about my dad and his background. But I don't know. I don't want to say that there was like a revelation, but everything just kind of came together in a much more kind of simpler way. And it just felt as though Islam for me was an opportunity to reconfigure and build upon the Christian theology and experience that I'd been kind of part of. I felt very drawn to the simplicity of the Islamic faith. And I liked the way that the Islamic lifestyle spoke to all areas of my life. I could see that there was an inherent beauty within the faith. And I really, really liked this thing, which I feel is very distinct about Islam, is that there is no kind of like brokering in shame or guilt. We're encouraged to kind of like accept the fact that we're human, we sin, we mess up, we say sorry, and we move on. And I think for me as a Christian, and particularly a Christian who was same-sex attracted, I struggled a lot with kind of sin and shame and who I essentially was. And I'm not saying that, that's not around in some of the kind of noise in the Islamic community about being same-sex attracted. But when I come back to the Quran, when I come back to the spirituality of Islam, I just see it has a very limited place. And so I just accept that I am a human, I mess up, and I just take delight that we have a God who is merciful, compassionate, and kind, and that the doors are open and I can just go back to him, mashallah. So yeah, I feel very, very grateful. But as I said, I'm a new Muslim. 9 months ago, I took my Shahada, but it's been a wonderful kind of walk thus far.
It's amazing. Both, stories are really amazing to hear. What we want to ask is, how did your friends and families, partners, etc., react?
I keep it a very, very personal thing, really. My family are nominally Catholic, but not practicing at all. And my children attend a Catholic school here in South Manchester. So I kind of just keep it to myself, but I connect with a group of Converse sisters here in Manchester that goes for breakfasts on Sunday mornings, and I'm trying to build up a little group of Muslim friends as a result of that. And I really enjoy those times as well.
And Giles, how did your family and friends react to your conversion to Islam?
Well, I have an amazing family, and I thank God for them. I think it's been easier for them because my dad was Muslim. So my mother, was familiar a bit, I guess, with the fact that, her husband was a brown man who was Islamic. And I've got a wider extended family. My brother, my father was one of 9. So I have like 30 kind of cousins all over the world who are practicing kind of Muslims. So in terms of my family, actually, they were more accepting than a lot of my friends. Most of my friends, I have to say, are same-sex attracted and would identify themselves as either lesbian or gay or bisexual. And, the dearest friends of mine are kind of curious and supportive, but they tend to always then come to the kind of question, so, well, what does religion say? What does your religion or Islam's kind of say about the fact that you are gay? So that's kind of been interesting, having to try and as a new Muslim, trying to explain how I understand things kind of to them. But there are some friends, I have to say, who do feel a sense of betrayal. They kind of say, how could you just? How could you cross this line? Given everything you've stood for, how can you align yourself with a religion that seeks to oppress people like me, who seeks to make me feel bad about who I am, and where I need to worry about my physical and emotional safety? How can you, align yourself with that? So I have found that very, very difficult because, I'm not a scholar. It's all very new to me. And I have happily identified myself as being a kind of gay person for most of my life. And I believe myself to be a well-adjusted person, as are my friends who are just trying to do the best they can in the world with limited resources. Most of them are in long-standing, fulfilling, relationships where they are trying to live peacefully and do right by their neighbors and their communities. And so I think they feel, a wariness about what has happened, for me personally, and a concern about my own kind of safety and where I might end up.
The betrayal is something that I think even people who are not gay or who are not same-sex attracted may experience when they convert, because we probably all have friends who are at some point. And I mean, myself, for example, my best friend throughout high school and into university was a gay man. And when I converted, he did see it as a sense of betrayal. Sheikh Bilal, maybe you have advice on how to handle this? What can we say, as Brother Giles said, if we're not scholars and we don't know the details and the minutiae of what the religion teaches, what would be a simple thing that we could say to our friends or even family members who feel that we betrayed them when we convert to Islam, whether we are gay or not, or bisexual or not, even for heterosexual individuals, but who might have gay friends or family members who will feel betrayed and threatened?
Yeah, it was interesting hearing that there are obviously negative, and I think the knee-jerk reactions to this topic in the Muslim community. There's a lot of exaggeration about the topic as well in the community. But for us as a Muslim community, we have to remember that Islam only deals with behaviors. So whether somebody, has a personal attraction or whatever, or maybe an addiction or anything, Islam is not concerned with that. If somebody has an inclination that is part of their inner psyche, so to speak, what Islam is concerned with is particular behaviors. Islam doesn't even discuss sexuality and gender and all of these topics. It's only concerned with our behavior, what Allah has asked us to do and what Allah has prohibited us from doing. And that's all that we should be concerned with, really.
Yeah, I just kind of want to say, and I don't know what Sister kind of Joanne may say about this, but I think one of the problems certainly within the Muslim kind of community is the sense that somehow or other LGBT is out there, that it's something that's kind of created and doesn't concern kind of us. And that then limits our conversation because we think that it's nothing to do with us, whereas actually same-sex attracted people are in our families, heritage Muslims or converts. It's not something that's distant. And so whilst we continue to other, and there's a lot of noise about standing up against LGBTQ, whilst we perpetuate that sense that this is something that happens to other people in other liberal Western societies, then we don't do right by our own community, because there are same-sex attracted people within our communities, and we need to kind of find a way of being able to talk about these things, both with, the LGBT community, but also within kind of Islamic community.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It is something that does get swept under the carpet, even though people do know about it. And there are, many people in our community that are LGBT and so on. Another thing that gets swept under the carpet is mental health as well. And there seem to be taboos around these topics, like, it doesn't happen in our community. This is only something that happens in Western societies, and it's got nothing to do with us. But
I think one thing that has always saddened me, because as you've said, Giles, this isn't something that's out there. This is something that I'm just sort of thinking back now, and I can think off the top of my head of 3 or 4 families who I know who have had somebody in their family come out to them as being gay or as being bisexual. And most of these families, alhamdulillah, were people who were compassionate and who tried to help. But one of the issues that we face is that this idea that you cannot be Muslim and also be same-sex attracted. And this is such a toxic mentality to have in our society. As Sheikh Bilal said, we don't deal with what's inside in terms of your attractions, your desires, your inclinations. We deal with your behavior. And not just that, every single person at some point will commit a sin. I mean, we have Muslims in our communities who are committing adultery. We have Muslims in our communities who are dealing drugs. We have Muslims in our communities who are doing, criminals. And they can, of course, still be Muslims. But when we see somebody who is saying, oh, I'm a homosexual, it's suddenly like, well, you can't be gay and be Muslim. And that's how, who says that? It's there's nothing in our religion that says that you are beyond the pale just because of something that's in your heart. And we need to find a way to discuss these things properly and to support people who might be going through this. Go ahead.
Especially, those that have converted to Islam. Because there will be people from, the LGBT community that come into Islam, and we have to find a way to accommodate for them and embrace them and welcome them.
So the next question then is, and I think, Giles, you spoke to this a little bit already, but how has the Muslim community reacted to your decision, and have you faced any negativity? And when I say the Muslim community, mashallah, we have a beautiful and accepting community of converts being built in various locations in the UK. As Joanne, you referenced the sisters group in Manchester, who are just lovely sisters. New Beginnings people are just lovely and welcoming to everybody. I'm referring here to the mainstream Muslim community, the wider Muslim community, including various heritage Muslim communities. Have you had much interaction with these communities? Have you had any negative reactions, positive reactions?
Well, mostly when I go to Jamaat, I go to a mosque that's mostly Arab run and that has good provision for women. But when I'm there, I'm just any other woman in hijab and abaya. I'm just there to pray. I don't go in screaming about who I am. I'm just there to make my Friday prayer, to have that moment between myself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like it's nowhere near my primary focus when I'm engaging with the Muslim community. I just move through life within those communities as a single woman with children.
So, but have you ever sort of broached the subject with people in your communities, or are you keeping this matter private?
I generally choose to keep it private, but say if within like a discussion group, somebody said something that was outright homophobic, then I'd try and call them out on it and try and maybe tease out where that was coming from. Or I'm not going to say to them that they have to suddenly come out and start wanting to go to a pride parade, but just a bit of general respect for each other. That bit of mutual respect goes a long way.
Absolutely. Brother Giles, how about yourself?
Well, I live in a rural area of the country where my nearest mosque is 35 miles away. Mashallah, New Beginnings is a wonderful space for me, and I feel such kind of gratitude to God for leading me to that community. And I feel very much kind of part of the events that take place, the Telegram conversations, and I really do feel a sense of like homecoming within that kind of community. But what I think is really interesting for me is that I'm 58, and when I used to go out and about in cities, gay men recognized me as a gay man just by walking down the street. People sort of knew that I was gay. That has changed. When I go to cities now, people identify me as a Muslim. People come up to me and say, Assalamu alaikum. And it's kind of interesting that since my conversion, I kind of ended up looking a bit like a Muslim person. And I think that's what people are now kind of seeing within me. And that brings me a lot of joy, actually. Yeah, I feel that as an older man, when I do go to mosques, I am seen in that way, and I perhaps am given a little bit more respect. Perhaps I get sometimes addressed as uncle. And so I guess my sexuality doesn't seem to show itself in the way that it used to, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And so it feels less of an issue.
When you say that people recognize you more as a Muslim now, as opposed to previously when other gay people would recognize you as being gay, what do you think has changed? Is it the way you dress? Is it the way you hold yourself? What would you think has changed?
Yeah, I think it comes back to this aspect, which I really, love about Islam, is it really, speaks to the whole of one's lifestyle, and so, and I'm sure this is something that will come up later in the podcast, but how I carry myself, my etiquette, my manners, my dress, my modesty, in some way, have become very important to me, at this time of my life. That was not the case 25 years ago when I was in nightclubs, with my half naked, and kind of dancing around. So things have shifted. But, subhanAllah, I also believe that something about seeking closeness with God, seeking proximity to God, wanting to emulate as much as I can something of the characteristics of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that, I wonder if something is happening within me that is transformative in some ways. And I feel in some strange way that I am actually becoming much more my authentic self. And within that has to include me being same-sex attracted. So as I journey as a Muslim, it doesn't mean that I have to drop the fact that I'm same-sex attracted. That would feel inauthentic. But actually, my moving forward within Islam needs to include all aspects of myself, but within an Islamic framework.
Can you share what your biggest sacrifice has been when embracing Islam?
I think probably sounds daft, but as an Irish person, giving up drinking was really difficult. I'd chosen a while back to not really go and pursue a new partner because I really wanted to just focus on my children and my career for a while. But kind of adjusting my lifestyle towards a more Islamic one has been a little bit of a challenge. And then at this time of year as well, like I run really hot and having to cover up quite a bit. That's also not the easiest thing in the world. As I said, like I was deliberately choosing to stay single anyway in the name of raising my children and prioritizing the next generation. So just adjusting my lifestyle was the challenge, really. Giving up pork, not a big deal at all because I'd been vegetarian for 4 years before that. And then making time for Salah, not the easiest, but I really like those 5 minutes that I get just to have that peace. It's really nice.
Yeah, so this is actually quite difficult for me kind of to talk about, but I really want to because I do think it's important. So I believe that when God created humankind, that he placed within us a desire for companionship, intimacy, partnering, and mating. And I don't think that's any less so for the same-sex attracted person as it is for the opposite sex attracted person. And so the expectation in terms of me living a Islamic lifestyle is that I'm celibate. And I've been celibate for 10 years. And it's not been easy, celibate and chaste. We're all called to chastity, but some of us are called to celibacy. And, inshallah, I've got, in terms of my life expectancy, another 30 or 35 years left. And I think that's going to be manageable, with God's help. But if you were talking to me as a 20-year-old, a 20-year-old convert, a 20-year-old heritage Muslim, and you're saying, well, this is what Islam kind of says about same-sex relationships, and basically you are now going to be celibate for 60 or 70 years of your life. I think we need to think very carefully about what we are requiring Muslims who are same-sex attracted to live by. As converts, we know the struggle of trying to get through 30 days of Ramadan on our own. We know what it's like to break fast alone. And for the convert or the heritage Muslim who is single, they will always have the opportunity to hope for, to pray for the fact that next year, inshallah, there may be a spousal partner. And if that relationship doesn't work out, the great thing about Islam is future marriages are possible. That is not the case for a same-sex attracted person. And it is as a psychotherapist, it is a huge task to integrate a healthy sexuality within a lifestyle framework that expects you to not live out what you experience as a natural desire. But I think we can be, as a community, too glib and too superficial in our condemnation about same-sex relationships and our expectations about how we should live without really paying enough attention on pastoral care and support to what we are asking of our brother and sister, our family member, the person who is standing in line with us in community prayer, what we are asking for them. It's hard enough being a convert, to Islam, particularly in later life, where you don't have the family and community behind you. But if there is no chance of a spousal partner, then it potentially is a real kind of struggle, I think, for us. And I really think, as a Muslim community, whilst there may be a place for YouTube videos and reels that kind of say, particularly during Pride Month, we need to stand up, to SSA, and you see images of rainbow flags burning. Well, that's just part of the story, So what about those of us who want to live in accordance with an Islamic faith? Our walk with God is important to us, but we find ourselves same-sex attracted. We really need to provide much more kind of support and care to each other. And we need to look out for each other, because it's a long, long journey alone.
Absolutely. It's a huge sacrifice. You remind me of some of the, it's such a high station in Islam. One of the scholars, from the past century, Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu-Wadda, his name was. He actually wrote a book about the different imams and Muslim scholars. They actually preferred to stay celibate rather than getting married. Great imams like Imam Nawawi, he never got married. I think he died in his 50s. And once he was asked, why didn't you get married? It's sunnah to do. Or he said, I just forgot to do it. And then Ibn Taymiyyah is another one, who's a very famous scholar, never got married. It's just a huge, huge sacrifice that, we can't even begin to think of.
For anybody who is not exclusively same-sex attracted, this is a struggle that is hard to fathom, in all honesty. And I want to say thank you to Brother Giles for opening up about that, because I think that it is something, I agree, we can be glib about it and unintentionally harmful because of that. And we do have a couple questions coming up regarding what would better support look like. So I hope that you'll share more on your thoughts around that when we get to those questions. I want to focus on something a little bit positive now, though. Since becoming Muslim, can you share something that has brought you joy since embracing Islam?
When it all feels too difficult, I come back to the idea of surrender, actually. And it does bring me a lot of joy, because I kind of say, actually, Allah knows best. He knows what's best for me in my particular set of circumstances. And I just need to surrender and park my intellectual thinking or debating or wish to argue and just really trust that, we have a loving, kind, merciful, compassionate God who is taking care of me as he is everybody else. And all I have to do is consent. I have to consent and surrender. And I find a great relief in that and a great kind of joy. I also like the idea I'm part of something that is so much bigger than I could have ever imagined. We're part of something that's very global. And, I am enjoying being a Muslim. I have to say, I like it. I feel like I'm coming into my most authentic sense of who I am. And that has made me feel like there's opportunity for connections across the globe. I'm part of something which has a lot of commonality as well as a lot of diversity within it. And that does bring me a lot of kind of happiness. But also, I think, as I'm learning about the faith and, all credit to Sheikh Bilal, I've been learning about the real beauty that we have within our faith around the etiquette of friendship and the most wonderful poetic writing about the virtues of friendship and companionship. And so whilst I accept I am not going to have the intimacy of a partner, and I've had one of those, and I know how wonderful that is, but to turn away from that and say no more is a big loss. But I believe kind of, God offers for me the opportunity to experience love and companionship and friendship in a way that is perhaps different to what I've experienced before. But I think, the etiquette of companionship and friendship really speaks to that and commands us as communities to take that seriously, to really dive deep within that and to cherish that as part of our heritage. And so I'd like to explore that a little bit more. And I think it's been good for me because I've been somebody, I think, as a gay man who's generally felt much safer around women in some ways. So most of my friends are either women or other gay men, But actually, this is forcing me to actually meet with men that I wouldn't ordinarily have much contact with. And, I have to say, it's been a wonderful experience. And I have, even through new beginnings, made some, tentative beginnings of friendship that have been really nurturing and really supportive to me. So I thank God for that.
MashaAllah, I love to hear that, because I think one of the things that for most people who convert to Islam that attracts them is the brotherhood and the sisterhood. Joanne, how about yourself?
Probably something a small bit simpler, but when you pray the Eid prayers in congregation, I usually go to the ones in the park, and just to know that you're with 20,000 people who are thankful in the same way, who are facing Kaaba together, who are having that moment. And it's people from all walks of life all over the world. And just the fact that in that moment, we're all the same.
So the next question is, what would you like to convey to the LGBT plus community about Islam?
That it's far more about compassion and care and love and friendship than it is about condemning people for who they are. That if you actually read through the Quran, it's not like there's pages and pages of bashing verses. There's a lot more about loving God. There's a lot more about being a good person. There's a lot more about caring for each other. There's a lot more about charity. So how about concentrating on the good stuff rather than maybe the odd bit of clobber?
Yes, I think, Joanna's kind of said it all really in some ways. I think I would just like to say, that we're, a mixed group of people. There are differences, within us. We're not all the same. And for the most part, we are just kind of seeking to live kind of respectfully and peacefully, with our neighbors. And that Islam has a strong tradition of fairness and justice, looking out for the orphan, the widow, the people who are on the edges of society, the people who are broken, marginalized, disenfranchised. And I think that has a resonance, in this day and age. I also think the other thing I'd like to kind of say, to the LGBT community particularly, is that sometimes, in our rights as LGBT people, it's about having a sexual relationship, in some ways. And so what is often not talked about is celibacy within the LGBT community. And actually, what I've realized, having walked that path for 10 years, is that there is also a lot of joy as well in being kind of single and celibate. There isn't, I have to use my heart in a different way. But I think we need to be creative about that. And I think sometimes the LGBT communities sometimes overemphasizes the importance of relationships or partnering or sexual relationships, and doesn't really kind of include that walking alone and being celibate is also a valid expression of being same-sex attracted as well.
So somebody who's sat on the fence now from the LGBT community and they're thinking about converting to Islam, what would you say to them?
Gosh, well, it's a tricky one. I would say think very, very carefully. One of the things I perhaps hadn't quite realized when I converted, it's not like Christianity where you just have to really think about what you do on a Sunday. It's like, okay, there's a number of things here that you're going to have to kind of adjust to. And I think one of the soundest advice that I've come across within the convert community is about the process of transition, the process of taking things kind of slowly. Not just in terms of, the leading up to the Shahada, but also thereafter. And I think, the importance of good pastoral support, good counsel, reading around what the expectations will be when you convert are really important as preparatory kind of features, I guess. But then thereafter, I think it's about, talking to people that you can trust. I think the thing which I think is a real shame is there's not very many of us who are out as same-sex attracted celibate Muslims. So in terms of emulating a lifestyle or seeing what's possible for the convert that's on the fence who may be same-sex attracted, there aren't very many visible role models that you can kind of go to talk to about what that's like for you in terms of your lived experience in some ways. So, mashallah, if there's any benefit that comes from this podcast, it belongs to God first and foremost, but it may also help move on some of the conversation. And certainly for myself, if there's anybody who is listening to this who wanted to speak with me personally, I'd be more than kind of happy to do that. But it is a big decision and it's not one to be taken lightly, but I do believe it is possible. And I think there are a community of people, same-sex attracted or otherwise, who will support you in your transition to the faith.
Yeah, I'd say just make sure as well that you're getting your information from reliable sources so that you're not kind of going straight in with some there's shades of grey, but there's a lot of information out there that's very angry. That's just going to be very harsh, but making sure that you're getting your information from reliable sources, trustworthy people is going to be important, and you may need some guidance in and around the time of Shahada. So before and after, that's going to be really important. But also to try and build your own community, build your friendship group, so that you've got other people with you. Like, it doesn't matter what orientation they are, just build your community really, and make the connections. Be with people who are living a good life. Because if the people around you are doing the right thing, then you are more likely to live a good, peaceful life too.
I think that's excellent advice about finding good companionship. And to be honest, this is universally good advice. Find good companionship, find people who are compassionate and empathetic, and at the same time will be supporting you to be better and to improve and to take those steps closer to Allah. I'd like to ask the next question to both of you. What would you like the wider Muslim community to understand about your journey, and how could they support you on this journey?
I think the first thing I'd like to kind of say to the Muslim community, because it kind of speaks to a lot of the noise that's out there currently, LGBT did not make me same-sex attracted. I think there's a sort of sense that somehow or other this LGBT phenomena is going to come into our schools and into our community and make people become same-sex attracted. So that's the first thing that I'd want to say, okay? That this wasn't a choice. And don't make it a choice. Don't make it a kind of it's either your faith or your sexuality. I am no less a Muslim that I'm same-sex attracted. It's not either or. It can be kind of both and that, I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm a flawed person. I have limited resources. But that's what being a Muslim is about, essentially. It's not for the pious. It's for the broken and the brokenhearted and the ones that mess up. And I'm right there in the thick of it, So I'm just trying to do the kind of the best that I can in some ways. And, this wasn't, a choice. Nobody made me this way. I wasn't influenced. And most of us who do identify, and I'm not somebody who does anymore, but who are within the LGBTQ community, they're not social activists. They're not going about trying to cause offense. They're not trying to kind of, convert children to become same-sex attracted. Most people are just kind of wanting to do the best they can with their neighbors. They're people in our families, in our communities, doctors, nurses, teachers, and we're just trying to kind of get by. We're not trying to kind of cause trouble or to offend, the Muslim community or any other kind of religious community. And so what I would say, to other Muslims, is just try and imagine what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, what we're kind of asking, our brothers and sisters to do or not do. And just try and imagine, that actually what it's like for them. And, to accept that God, this is part of God's plan, being able to say, this is not my territory. I get so frustrated when most of the people I come across on Instagram Reels or, scholarly papers or YouTube videos, they're not same-sex attracted, so they're speaking out of a scholarly or moral kind of agenda, but they don't know what it's like. And so I just think some kind of humility or some recognition of that or some acknowledgement that they're not actually living this out on a day-to-day basis, I think would go a long way in helping me feel that this is something that isn't about them and us, that this is something we're all struggling with and trying to make sense of together.
Joanne, how about you? What would you like the Muslim communities to understand about your journey?
I second everything that Giles has said there. He's right on the nail, really. But also just to know that everybody has their own struggle, and that in Al-Fatiha, we're asking to be guided to the straight path. It's not the assumption that everybody is on the straight path already. We're asking for a bit of help in getting there. So we're coming, everybody's going to have their own tests. Everybody's going to have their own struggles. So same-sex attraction could be somebody's test. Substances could be somebody else's. Struggling with their salah could be somebody else's. So who knows? You don't know. You don't know what somebody else's struggles are. And even if somebody looks perfect from the outside, you don't know what's going on the inside. So the best thing that you can do is just be compassionate.
Absolutely. The compassion, I think, is the big one that sadly a lot of people lack in their rush to be critical and be righteous.
So I just want to ask you, what things should we avoid doing as a Muslim community? So there may be things that are done with good intentions, but they're not very helpful.
Sometimes there's a tendency to kind of jump in with kind of advice and sound bites and kind of saying how it is. And I think, maybe just kind of backing off a little bit from that. The other thing I think, and it is important to make note of, one of the wonderful things I've come across, I guess, within our spirituality is that there's a dua for everything, but it tends to be very formulaic and very linear. This idea, pray these things 3 times before you go to sleep, and tomorrow you will have wealth, new car, new wife, etc. And I say that in a slightly joking way because within religious traditions, and I think this occurs within Islam, is there's an idea that you can pray away the gay. And, I'm not here to question any anecdotal evidence, but I'm a trained psychotherapist specializing in child and adolescent mental health. And, sexual orientation is generally fixed, during middle adolescence. And it doesn't seem to be kind of God's will, that by praying certain du'as, the gay will go away, you know? So, and I say that, you know, both professionally and personally, because as a Christian in my adolescence, I fasted and I prayed throughout the night for my sexuality to be taken away from me. And I ended up in hospital, severely malnourished and underweight, and in a very, very poor mental state. And I believe that there are people who are struggling with the fact that they are same-sex attracted because they don't feel that they will be understood or accepted within the Muslim communities, who will be praying away the gay. And they will feel that if their sexuality isn't changing, it's a fault in their spirituality, that they're not praying enough in some way. And I just think that's a failure of our psychological and spiritual resources. I think it is far more healthy to invest spiritually and psychologically in how we integrate our sexuality into an Islamic framework as practicing Muslims that lead to well-being and us being truly and fully ourselves, rather than trying to pray away something, you know? And so I would also kind of say particularly to our heritage, you know, community, brothers and sisters and family members, you know, don't just think by arranging in a marriage, this is going to sort everything out, that something about the kind of natural biology is going to kick in after a wedding, you know? You are likely to have two very unhappy people. Now, I'm not going to say that same-sex attracted people can't get married. I don't know what the kind of legalistic aspect of that is in terms of consummation of marriage for it to be valid within Islam. But maybe, you know, will be people who, with full disclosure and full discussion, find a way to come together for kind of company and companionship. And I don't see that there's a problem with that. I certainly think that could be something that would be open to me, but do so without hiding anything, because you could have two very unhappy and kind of happy people, you know, within that. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually personally know two sisters who were tricked into marrying young men in order to straighten up the men, and ended up divorced within a few months of having married them. And because of how their communities work and the shame culture that they have in those communities, it's really severely impacted the young women, because they were not told that these young men were same-sex attracted. The parents knew and thought, well, let's get him married and that'll force him to be straight. And it was just a mess all around. And, you know, people need to think about that, as you said, you know, what kind of damage are they doing when they do this? You know, never mind, you're trying to force somebody to be something that they are not, but you're also lying and deceiving the other person into a situation that they would never choose for themselves. And, you know, the young people in question are, until now, quite damaged by this and quite traumatized by this. And it is just so sad to see that happening, as opposed to just thinking about, okay, how can we accommodate people who are dealing with these issues, and how can we treat them with empathy and with love and with support and with compassion, and not trying to force them into, you know, shoehorn them into a lifestyle that we deem acceptable.
I think trying to avoid knee-jerk reactions and trying to avoid just being too up in people's face about things. Like, obviously we're called to correct, but we're to do that gently. We shouldn't be snapping at people about who they are or challenges they face. I think if, like, in terms of the mental health of a young person who's maybe, like, say somebody's 17 or 18, they're maybe doing their exams, but they're struggling with who they are and understanding what that means for them, to just snap at them and go, no, that's wrong. That's not going to do anybody any good. And to kind of meet them where they are with love and kindness and respect is going to be That's going to be much better for their mental health. It's going to hopefully give you a much better adjusted adult at the end of it. Maybe somebody who can then go on to make their own decisions, choose the path that they want to follow, and probably be a bit more healthier and more secure in themselves.
Could I ask you guys to expand on this question, actually, in giving us concrete examples of things that well-meaning Muslims have said to you that were meant to be supportive, but were actually not supportive or glib?
It's not really like an expression, but it's a graphic I've seen somewhere, which is basically kind of rainbow paint falling from the sky and then an umbrella over a family with Quran and Sunnah on it. And I'm just thinking, like, I'm the mother with 2 children and technically I'm both. So it's just like, this is really ridiculous.
Yes, I know the graphic, and that thought did cross my mind but there are people who are families and have children and are following Quran and Sunnah, and yet they are struggling with this. So yeah, it doesn't. I think this harks back to, Giles, what you said about at the start about this is not an outside issue. This is, there isn't the Muslim community and a wall around it or a moat around it, and the LGBT is outside. It is very much, there is an intersection, because there will always be people who are same-sex attracted who may be struggling with these things, who are Muslim and who are trying to be practicing Muslims. That's true.
Yeah, I think very easily, I hear comments being equated with same-sex attraction and sin and loot, and descriptions of being sent to the hellfire, and I just find that just so kind of upsetting, to be hearing that. My Muslim prayer app has just released a reel which shows a rainbow flag in flames. And I think any Muslim who sees that, well, same-sex attracted Muslim who sees that, it's not just seeing a rainbow flag, it's association of fire with the hellfire, and people who are same-sex attracted, going to the hellfire. And I just find that so kind of upsetting, in some ways. I also think sometimes, well-intentioned, people in their curiosity will want to understand, why are you same-sex attracted, and come up with these, psychological explanations which have been discredited, about absent fathers and domineering mothers, stuff that just really isn't very helpful, as though something has gone wrong, there's some pathology somewhere or other, and I just think that's very, very dangerous, because if people believe that there's something that's kind of wrong, then there's something that can be fixed, and then you have things like conversion therapies taking hold, and a whole raft of things which are really psychologically unsafe and are not founded in any empirical evidence. So I just think, we need to move away from some of this very historical way of thinking about things, and perhaps move into much more of an acceptance that we don't quite know why it is that some people are same-sex attracted. The way I think of it is most people are right-handed, but some people are left-handed. They're not normal. They're just to be left-handed people. I think it's a bit like that with sexuality. But we really need to move on to just thinking, well, what do we then do? In spending so much energy and feeling we need to stand up against LGBTQ, we lose the momentum of thinking, how do we respond and care for and love people within our communities who feel different for many reasons, but one of those reasons is around their sexual attraction. And I think if there was more energy that was placed within that, we'd be a happier community, and people would feel, because one of the things I think is kind of important is I think there's sort of an anxiety somehow or other that the LGBTQ agenda is going to cause people to leave their Muslim communities and move into this other thing. They're going to move across to the dark side. And what I would say to the Muslim community is, if you don't want that to happen, make your spaces and your places experiences where people feel that they belong, and then they won't go away, So I think let's focus on what we need to do to make people who are same-sex attracted feel welcome and have a place and have a right to be there, and not create such a feeling of hostility that people will move, understandably, to where they feel safe, where they are going to feel loved, where they are going to experience community. That's going to be a normal reaction. And as I said kind of earlier, when I first came into the LGBTQ space, there were a lot of refugees from religious traditions where they just felt that they couldn't be themselves within those places of worship.
I always find it very difficult to speak to the people in the Muslim community. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of misinformation about it. People don't even know what our religion actually says about these things to begin with. And then most of us have never sat with anybody. In fact, this is the first time, I'm sat talking about this with you and or hearing somebody who is LGBT from the Muslim community and just discussing their experiences. The majority of our community, they've not even done that. There's a lot of ignorance from myself. I've learned a lot of important things today as well. And there's definitely a lot of ignorance in the Muslim community, and we need to have more discussions, and we need to educate ourselves more on these topics.
I think it's really important for us as people who are not dealing with these issues in our personal lives to be aware of our own biases. Like you've just said, Bilal, there are things that you don't know, and there are things that a lot of us don't realize. But one thing that I have noticed in our communities, it's not just the ignorance. The ignorance is rife, yes. But also there is the tendency, it's an un-Islamic idea, but it is a prevalent idea amongst Muslim communities that there's an equation of the inclination and the desire with the sin. The graphic that your app has put out with the rainbow flag burning and all of that, and how that could be and would be very triggering, I'm sure, for a lot of people, and very threatening, I'm sure, for a lot of people. We can say in Islam that if you do these certain actions, that those are sins. We cannot say that you will end up in the hellfire thereby, because Allah forgives and a person can make tawbah. And, we know in our tradition that there is denying Allah, and dying while denying Allah or refusing to obey him is the one thing he will not forgive. Everything else he can forgive. And so this idea that the gays are in the hellfire is very, very against what we have always been taught and what we should be spreading.
Yeah, and you're speaking about somebody who's,
actively practicing.
Yeah.
Yes, actively.
You speak about somebody who's
exactly.
actively. So right. Somebody isn't, but they're still gay.
And this is the thing.
It's not even a problem to begin with.
Exactly.
A lot of our community, they don't even understand.
This is what I'm trying to express, is that we seem to have adopted, and perhaps this is a post-colonial byproduct, but we seem to have in our Muslim communities adopted this idea that somebody having the desire of same-sex attraction makes them inherently sinful. And that is such a toxic mindset. And that is such an anti-Islamic mindset. And that is not what the Prophet ﷺ brought. If anything, when I hear these stories of people who are this way and who choose to not act on it for the sake of Allah, wow. I mean, subhanAllah, that is, I can't imagine making that sacrifice. And as you said, Giles, you were talking about how people can be celibate for a time, but there is always the possibility of marriage on the horizon. The potential of marriage, or the potential of being able to, have a halal outlet for your desires. For people for whom that is not a possibility for whatever reason, I think may Allah accept everything that you are doing for his sake. It's an incredible sacrifice that we should have much more empathy towards. And the idea is, I think one thing that I have been guilty of in terms of glib equations, saying things like, well, it's like giving up alcohol, it's like giving up pork. No, it's not. It really, really is nothing like that, subhanAllah. And for our listeners, I think we should really reflect on this. If we encounter somebody who is struggling with these issues, who wants to be Muslim, who wants to practice, and who feels that they can't because of, how their sexuality is, before we make these comments in an attempt to placate a person, to think, is that really helpful? Is it really like that? Probably it isn't anything like that, subhanAllah.
And I also kind of think, I think there is wisdom when Allah says, or the Sunnah says, or our tradition says that, family and marriage is like half your deen. I think there is a wisdom in that, in as much that trying to be, a singular Muslim is tricky. We are called to practice and live out our walk with God and our Islamic lifestyle in groups, and the family is an important part of that and I think for us as converts, we know what that's like when we convert on our own and trying to do this on our own. And I think for the person who is same-sex attracted and who is celibate, there's this other challenge because you predominantly will be on your own in your household. The way that we construct our households in the West is that most people kind of, either live with friends and then they kind of get their own places and then they partner and create families in their own kind of households. But I live alone. I've lived alone pretty much, for now 15 years. And I've got another 30, 35 years, to do that with. And still be a Muslim, and still feel that I'm part of a community and I have a heart, I need to know what to do with my heart. I want to love, I want to receive love. I have a need for intimacy and companionship. So, I look to my Muslim community to be creative with me about that, not just for myself, but what we're expecting, because this is what all this noise is about. It's often directed at young people. And I hear this, from scholars that says we need to be supportive of our young, same-sex attracted person. Well, I think we need to be supportive of all, same-sex attracted persons. But I think there is something, about, people who convert or, even as converts, we may have children who will come out, at 18 or 19. And are we really asking, our sons and daughters, to be celibate for 80 years of their life? If we are, then we really need to think very creatively and generously about what that means for them.
I think Giles really hits the nail on the head there. I think that the support through all of our lives is obviously really important. I think it's how maybe in terms of living together, maybe we need to look at other structures. Maybe we need to look at, say, friends coming together, building a household, or we need to look at, say, two single mothers, even if they're not they're not in a relationship, but working together to maybe help the kids out or that sort of thing. And if people aren't going to marry, then maybe there needs to be. Humans are not solitary creatures. We never were, never will be. And having the support of others in our lives, massively important.
Can I ask a question to you, Sisters Joanne and to Sister Amanda? So a belief I have, which may be misplaced, is I look at the sisters, I think, oh, you've got it. There is seemingly such an expression of community amongst yourselves and support to each other in a way that I don't see so obviously apparent between us as brothers. I think if I think of the Telegram chat, for example.
Yeah, I think that's more of an issue with masculinity in general. And I think outlets for men to make friends are, particularly beyond a certain age, particularly beyond the age where maybe you'd be playing football or whatever, are few and far between. There's an initiative in Ireland called the Men's Sheds, and it's basically giving a space to maybe craft or do DIY or whatever. And it's just basically designed to give men a space to come together, do things and talk and help to protect male mental health. But I do think it is something that I'm not sure I'm not sure what kind of masculinities or what kind of view of men expressing feelings or supporting each other is causing the issue. But I do think that men providing brotherly support for each other is something that seems to be lacking in many communities, really.
I would agree with that. I think too, just there is the phenomena of, is it for every 3 or 4 sisters who convert, there's one brother who converts. So we outnumber, as converts, the women outnumber the men. So there will, So in a mixed group, because obviously the New Beginnings Telegram group is both the brothers and the sisters, we do just outnumber the brothers, and that's how it is. However, in the convert pair group that I have founded in Cardiff, that I've helped to found in Cardiff, we have separate WhatsApp groups for the brothers and the sisters. And the sisters group is chatty. The brothers group, it's like pulling teeth to get them to have a conversation. And sometimes they have to steer conversations. And sometimes, when a brother needs help, he will DM one of the supporters, he'll DM one of the mentors rather than bringing it up in the group. And I think that also says a lot just about how men support each other. They are far more perhaps private than women are. And I'm totally generalizing here. I'm sure this is not the case across the board, but just as a tendency, it seems they're far more private. They're far less likely to want to get sort of the group's reaction to something. They want one person's advice and they want to keep it on the down low. Whereas the sisters are like in the group, OMG sisters, this is what's happened to me today. What do you all think? And then everybody piles in with their opinions, and that might be helpful, might not be helpful, to be honest. But even just for getting together outside of these WhatsApp groups, sisters will go for coffee, will go for lunch, will go for breakfast. The brothers might come to an event, but probably won't. They'll sign up for a class, but they won't come to a weekly halaqah. And it is, we've noticed this as well. So I do think that is something that, we need to speak to as well in terms of encouraging the brothers to create these friendships. And I think, Joanne, you were saying about creating friendships beyond a certain age. I did read something the other day about a study that was done, and I should find it actually, but a study that was done that showed that the majority of men in their mid-30s only had close friends who they had known since school. They didn't have close friends that they met in university or that they met in work. That doesn't happen. Whereas for women, we have close friends that we went to kindergarten with, and we have close friends who we met 3 weeks ago at the mosque. And all of them are close friends, subhanAllah. So I think we do I don't know if it's biology, but we do have very different ways of supporting each other.
A certain level of that needs to come from within brother spaces as well, because obviously Muslim spaces are segregated, so we can say what we want about sisters, but it really needs to come from the brothers. And also we kind of need to recognize as well how men communicate with each other. And I don't like overgeneralizing about how a certain gender does things, but in this case, it is a brother's issue that needs a brother's solution, basically. So
I really hate to say this, but we have run out of time. Giles and Joe, do you have any last comments you'd like to make?
Thank you for having us on, and thank you for facilitating this discussion. I think it's an important one to have, and I hope that everybody who listens has gotten something from it, and I hope that everybody who's been part of the discussion has too, because I know that I have definitely.
Yeah, completely echo what Sister Joanne has kind of said. All credit to New Beginnings for willing to tackle the elephant in the room. I don't think it's a brave thing to do. I really appreciate the opportunity, for us to talk together. As I've said, if there was somebody who was sitting on the fence, who was same-sex attracted, wanted to know what living a life of celibacy looked like and felt like, I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone who might come through to New Beginnings wanting to explore that further. But many thanks to you, Sister Amanda and Sheikh Bilal, for your wisdom, your kindness, and your time this morning.
I want to say thank you to you both, Joanne and Giles, for giving us your time today and for opening up to us today. And I really do appreciate that these are difficult topics to discuss, and there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about it. I appreciate you coming and holding this space with us today. And I would reiterate that if anybody is listening and wants to know more about this, if you are struggling with any of these issues and you want some support, please do reach out. If you are struggling to understand these issues and you would like more guidance on it, please also do reach out. You can DM us on social media. It's @Beginnings UK on Instagram, or you can email us directly on unplugged@beginnings.org.uk. That's it for another episode of the New Beginnings podcast. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share on social media and with family and friends.
Yes, please do share and subscribe. We're on all major podcast platforms. Inshallah, we'll see you next time.
I look forward to it. But for now, thank you for listening.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.